Hello everyone and welcome to our webinar. Today we will talk about consulting procurement maturity and how you can compare against the best. We will share results from the survey that we have run this summer and also give you some insight from another survey that we did 5 years ago on the exact same topic. So this webinar is brought to you by Consulting Quest. Consulting Quest, it's a company that helps organization to better buy, manage, and use consulting services. And I am the CEO and the co-founder, and I'm a consulting sourcing expert. And we actually wrote a book called Smart Consulting Sourcing. So if you're interested, you can see the links here. And we also have a podcast that is a weekly podcast on those topics. But let's start about the maturity of consulting services. And you might wonder why it's important to measure the maturity of your consulting sourcing capability. Well, it's the idea that, in business, you have to measure what you're doing and measure what is important towards your customer and your performance, and then build on that to do better. And that's exactly what it is about. It's about transforming your procurement in order to do the better, to buy better, to manage better those consulting services, to create more value for your company, and to create more value for your procurement group. So, in other words, and we'll talk about that longer in the webinar, it's a way to measure how well you're doing and how much you're progressing. So this is what we will see today. First, we will talk about what is consulting procurement maturity. First, what is a maturity grid, but then we look into what is specific to consulting. Then we will go to how to use the maturity grid. Then we'll talk about the results of the survey, how companies fare on this maturity grid on average. And then I'll give you some tips on how you can take your capability to the next level. And what's next. It's very short to say what's next for that topic, and then we'll have a Q&A session. So what is consulting procurement maturity? So first, go back to the basics. What is a capability maturity grid? So it's a maturity grid. It's a model that is used to measure the progress towards a goal. And usually it's made as a matrix. You have on the left hand, you will have the criteria that be examined, and on the headers you'll find the different levels of maturity that can be achieved. So this is what a maturity grid. It's a tool that's used by organizations to measure how mature they are on a given dimension. But this is not new, and it's not specific to procurement. For instance, this is a maturity model that has been developed by the US Department of Defense. And the idea is to look at processes and how mature they are. So there are many, many models and maturity grids all over the place. Procurement, but not only procurement, research and development, innovation. There's many, many things. It's and very often used in the consulting world. But what about consulting sourcing? So here, this is a maturity grid that we built at Consulting Quest in order to help our clients to measure their maturity. And we have 4 stages, from operational to best in class. And we also have 4 dimensions. I can't count today, obviously. 4 dimensions. The 4 is strategy, governance, and organization. Second is sourcing process. Then enablers and category management. So we'll go in more detail for each of those categories. But the idea here is that for each one of those dimensions, we have defined, levels of maturity. If we took, for instance, the first one, strategy, governance, and organization, we see that at the operational level, we are very decentralized. Procurement is almost not involved. And the sourcing is led by operational teams. That's what you find mostly in small to mid-sized companies when they're buying consulting. While in the best in class, you will see something that is much more sophisticated. You have systematic measure by assessment. You have a collaborative approach to consulting sourcing. and procurement is considered as a full business partner. So you see that in between there are many, many options, and this is what we're trying to describe, what are the different options, and help companies when they want to move up, if you will, in the maturity grid, then we're trying to get them, what are the different steps there. So the first dimension is strategy, governance, organization. What is this? First, the strategy, it's simple. It's those choices and priorities that you make in order to achieve the ambitions of your company. Then we have also governance. So this is a set of rules and structure that guide decision making within the organization. And finally, the organization, as in organizational structure, which is how are we structured and how do we manage within the company. And what is important is that all those areas are congruent, meaning that they're going in the same direction, they are harmonious, and they delivering and for in the same ambition, right? So the idea, if we translate that into consulting, how to buy consulting services, that would be how are the decisions made when buying consulting services, who is involved, and how is consulting supporting the overall strategy. All of this is essential in order to really create the more value for your organization when you buy consulting. The second dimension is the sourcing process. So here we're talking about how consulting services are purchased from the need to the completion of the project. It's not only just a purchasing process, it's like much broader. And the thing is that it's sometimes difficult for internal stakeholders to articulate their objective, or they might be unclear about the process. And that means that the process is inefficient and it's frustrating for everyone. So here the idea is to identify what are the weaknesses, if you will, in your sourcing process. So is the sourcing process adapted to consulting services? Do you have the right steps? Is it adequate for the volume of projects that you're handling? Then we have the enabler. So what is an enabler? It's not easy to explain, but the idea is here, there are little things. It can be a taxonomy, for instance, but it can be also the digital solutions that are in place and that can help you to be a little bit faster, share the information a little bit better, encourage collaboration, and etc. And without those enablers, it's harder to take advantage of opportunities, right? So it's, do you have the right enablers in place, and are you leveraging digital to facilitate communication and collaboration? So obviously, we have here a lot about digital solutions. And category management. So if you're in procurement, you're not going to learn much on this page, but the idea is it's a way to manage procurement in a set of segments that are that contain similar products, markets, suppliers, and a much finer way to manage procurement. And it includes spend analysis, market intelligence, performance management, category strategy, panel management, and many more things. So here the idea is to see how your organization is leveraging category management principle for the consulting category. Now, how to use the maturity grid that we saw before. So before we go there, let's think about why it is important. So I mentioned before that what is interesting is that you want to move up, you want to do better, you want to improve your capability. And it means that actually you want to transform. And the first step when you want to transform anything, even if it's a small step that you want to take, you need to define where you are starting. What's your starting point? Then you define your vision. It means, what's my target? You need to align your stakeholders, and then make sure that this vision is shared within the top management. But you need to say, okay, I'm starting from there. I'm starting in point A, and I want to go to point B. This is kind of those two steps. Then you define the implementation and communication plans. And this is, how do I get from A to B? And how do I communicate with the teams on how we want to get, why we want to get from A to B, and how we want to get there? then you have to tackle the roadblocks, because no transformation is easy, and there are always obstacles that can be linked to resistance from people. So it's change management, right? But it can also be about structural things. Organization is not right, or the digital solution that you have don't allow you to really make it the way you want, etc. Then when you have done that, then you celebrate your victories and you keep the momentum, because you cannot, oh, we have transformed and that's it, we're done. No, you're never really done. So why am I telling that? Why am I talking about transformation journey? But because this maturity grid, when it comes to improving the way you buy consulting services, that it's going to be your reference. It means that's where you define your starting point, because you can assess how mature you are today. Then you look at the grid and you say, this is how mature I want to be in the future, in 1 year, 2 years, 3 years from now. And then it will give you the path on what are the different steps that you need to take in order to be at that target in 2 or 3 years from now. So this is how you define your starting point, set your target, measure your progress. Another thing that is super important is that what is the right level for you? So I won't tell you that everybody needs to be best in class, because that's not true. No, you don't necessarily need to be best in class. Each company will have their own targets depending on their maturity and their ambitions. First thing to know, it's usually easier to go step by step. Sometimes the change is so radical that it's going to be hard to implement it and to get it to stick. So sometimes it's better to do step by step. Then the target depends on the volume of consulting project you handle in a year. Why? Because when you're a very big organization and you're very high volume, and you have enough volume in order to have someone that is dedicated, that can do only that company, not only should they have someone that is dedicated, but they should aim for best in class, because that's where they will get the best ROI, right? While a smaller organization or less mature one can settle for a standard or a leading level. Let's look at a startup, for instance. Do they really need to be at best in class level? No, not really. They just need to do it right, have the right process, and make sure the right people are involved in the purchase, because they only buy once or twice a year. That's enough. But if you buy once a week or twice a week, then that's another story. And then you need to be more mature, you need communication, you need a taxonomy, you need to have a certain set of processes, etc. So it's really a matter of return on investment, and it's also a matter of how much the extra step will bring you in terms of value for the organization. And then another thing is that it's not mandatory to have the same level of all dimensions. And that's very important. You don't need to be best in class in everything. Maybe you can be best in class in strategy, organization, but in category management, you're not ready. Why? Because the rest of your organization and the rest of your procurement is not yet at that level. You cannot move faster than them, right? You have to wait a little bit. Or there's many other options. But the idea is that you have to really define what's the target that is relevant for you and that brings the more value for the less investment. It's kind of, that's the return on investment, right? So how do companies fare? So now I'm going to share numbers. So give you a sense of the survey. We had roughly 70. We had 76 respondents. We had companies that are a little bit of each size, 25% large companies, and 50% consulting buyers. So we have a good view of what's happening. The survey we did 5 years ago had a similar profile. We had 70 respondents, and we had a little less large companies, a little more small ones. And that says a little bit about who answered that. Overall, so with the maturity grid, we are able to build a score that goes from 0 to 40. 40 is best in class, 0 is operational. And then we have the 4 little stages. 5 years ago, we were at 25.9. And this year, we were at 26.9. So we moved from a standard average level to a leading average level. And actually, if you look closely at the numbers, large companies are a little bit further. They are more at 31, 32, while small to mid-sized companies are more at 23, 24. But it makes sense, of course, because what I said before, small to mid-sized companies don't necessarily need to be much higher than that, while large companies should be much higher. So that makes a lot of sense. Now let's look at the different questions. So you had 10 questions in the survey, and we go through all of them and talk a little bit about what it means. So the first part was about the organization. So we were wondering if they had a procurement team or someone focused on consulting. So we see that 30% of the respondents don't have a team or person focusing on consulting. It makes sense considering that we had small and mid-sized companies that answered to. So it'd be interesting to dig a little bit into that to know if the big ones did have, all of them had a focal point in the team. So the second one is an extremely interesting one. So here we had the exact same question on the survey 5 years ago. Is procurement involved in the procurement process? So you see here, I think this is the most obvious change of the whole study, is that we moved from a little bit of everything, where almost all levels were equivalent, to clearly procurement considered as a full business partner. So I would say it's probably because we've talked a lot about the role of procurement in the last 5 years, and that procurement has worked a lot to be recognized within the organization. But this is a significant change, and it's good news. It's like because when it comes to consulting, that, as I mentioned very quickly before, that collaboration is key when you buy consulting services. Why? Because the only ones who know what they're looking for, what are their needs, and who they want to work with, those are the business lines. But the ones who know how to actually buy a service, these are the procurement people. And some of them have to mitigate the risk and make sure that the process are compliant. And the others, they want to have the best value from the consulting firm that they buy from. And unless they work really closely together, there'll always be something that is not working well, right? So knowing that in 50% of the cases, the procurement is considered as a full business partner, it means that we have a good foundation to build on and improve the way companies buy consulting services. So this is about competition. So to what extent do you organize competition between providers for your projects? So the idea here is to look at how many times do you launch a competition. So a competition is not necessarily a huge bid process. It can be very, very, modest. But the idea is that you don't have someone in mind just before. It can't be the only way you buy consulting services, because one consulting firm might not be the best consulting firm for another project. It's not like they can do it all. They usually have a quite specialized focus. And even if you look at the very, very big consulting firms, the partner that you work with, he has a practice, or at least he has an expertise and experience, and he cannot do everything. And if he tells you he can, then we have a problem. So the idea here is to look at how many times is a competitive bidding organized. And we see that in almost 60% of the organizations that answered, they organize occasionally competitive biddings. It means that there is still some sort of a, informal procurement process. And that can be a problem. And that can be a problem because for many reasons, one being that you don't always get the best price when companies are not in competition, or that you don't open yourself to newcomers and new expertise and new methodologies and so on. So there are many, many reasons why it's not always a good idea. Do you use NDAs systematically? So that's that's an interesting thing. 5 years ago, a lot of our respondents said they were using NDAs systematically, and now it's a little bit less. But what is striking, it's that 16% of the people that answered rarely use NDAs when they're launching consulting projects. And that's something I tell to my clients. I tell them, don't launch a project with a consulting firm without an NDA, unless you know them and you've worked with them and you may have an active NDA there. Because if you don't have an NDA, that you might share information that you don't want your competitors to know. And consulting firms, they work with everyone. I'm not saying that they will share your information like that. I'm just saying that it's healthy business relationship. We're going to talk about confidential things. Let's sign an NDA. And it just says that you mean business as well, and say that I'm serious about that. I'm serious about confidentiality. I'm not going to share with you information about my company unless we have an NDA signed between us. So this is very, very important. And it might not be obvious for a HR project or a operational excellence project, even though that can be competitive advantage for your company if everything goes right. But I've seen companies not signing an NDA, even if they were working on a market entry strategy, for instance. And this is just dangerous. This is dangerous for your organization. So please think about using them. And it should be almost systematic. It's easy. It's so simple to implement. So just do it. And before you send an RFP, send an NDA so you're sure that you're covered and you can share information. And the consultants can share information as well with you, and they feel comfortable doing so. So just think about it. This is easy. This is an easy way to improve your consulting sourcing capability, actually. Do you manage a panel of suppliers? So this is, I'm going to explain the chart because it's may not be completely easy. So here we have the numbers we had the same question 5 years ago, and we wanted to compare it from with this year. So we asked for that question, and we had set 4 answers. One is we don't have a panel. We have nothing. We don't care. First, we have a list of preferred providers. Here we meant we have a list of providers that are qualified. That's it. They're not managed. They're not. We don't assess. We don't make sure that our recurrent needs are covered. We just have a list of preferred providers that has been done, and those companies have been qualified, but that's it. They've started moving. It's not dynamic. It's just a list. Then third level is we have a panel of providers, and it is covering our recurrent needs. It's all of those projects that we do every year. We know that we have that panel. And then the first level, that is the most advanced, as you can imagine, is that not only do we have a panel for recurrent needs, but we also have a panel that covers our projected needs for the year. It means that we are anticipating, we are discussing with our business line, and we know what kind of project they will do. So of course, you're not going to cover 100% of the project that can happen. We all know that's not possible, but you can cover 80 to 90% of the needs. So here, this was the question. So in 2017, we had the bulk of the respondents were in we have a list of preferred providers. There were 46%. we see that 5 years now, we are 41%. So there's an improvement here. Well, we don't have a panel, 12%, 14%, same thing, didn't move. Well, the other two, we manage a panel of providers, and we manage they have slightly improved for no, not improved for this one, but significantly improved for the most advanced one. So what we can say is that the companies that had already something improved. The ones that had nothing, they stay where they were. But the good news is that 45% of the respondents manage a panel of providers, which is a good thing. And because it's when you start looking at companies, making sure that your needs are covered, that their capabilities, mean what they do is aligned with what you need. So it's really going in the right direction. Performance management. So performance management, it's how do you measure the performance of your consulting providers? So here we are thinking about, at the end of a project, we should make sure that we got the impact that we were expecting, that the people that were on board had the right skills, that we get the right return on investment, value for money, that the budget was respected, the timeline was respected, deliverable were high quality. This is interesting for both sides. It's interesting for you. You know that provider, that supplier is good at what they do, but it's also interesting for the consulting firm because they rarely have feedback from their clients. So here we see that 5 years ago. So the clear part is the number from 5 years ago. So we see that 5 years ago we had a lot of companies that were doing informal post-assignment assessment, which means that they were doing something, calling the consultant and say, "Hey, I'm happy, that was great," but that's it. But there was no process. There was no checklist or list of things that had to be done and so on. So we see that in 5 year period, we have a great improvement. It means that now we're moving up and we have much more companies that are evaluating most of their projects with a post-assignment assessment that is organized and structured, meaning that they take the time to share the feedback with their suppliers on their main project, which is also a very, very good news. It really goes in the right direction. And actually, that's the only way you can know if that company has the right skills and are covering your needs. So going back to the question about, do you manage your panel of suppliers? It's really hard to anticipate and to build a panel that is covering your needs if you don't measure the performance at some point. So this is kind of goes together. Consulting fees. So this one is funny because we see that different panel, 5-year difference, exact same results. Like literally, the difference is minimal. It means that nothing has moved. So what we mean by creative consulting fee structure, it's everything that is not the flat fee or the hourly fee, right? We're looking at performance-based bonus. We need to add a value sharing model. There are many, many other models that exist. And I think that this is typically where we should dig a little bit in the next years, because the question might be a bit vague. But the idea here is that nothing has moved and nothing has changed, and only 11% of the companies systematically use creative fee structure. It means that you don't even have that performance-based bonus. It's say, if I'm happy, I'm willing to pay you X. There's not only that, which I think could be a very interesting way of aligning the interest of the consultants with the clients. So this is something that could be explored a bit further in another survey in the years to come. Strategic alignment. So here we're talking about strategy, and we're talking about are we sure that we're spending our money on the right project? And why is it important? It's because usually the consulting spend represent from 0.5 to 3% of your overall revenues. It means that it's not small. It's not the biggest spend, but it's not small. And the impact that it has on your company is huge, because we're talking about strategy, we're talking about efficiency, productivity, and so on. So you need to go in the right direction. I've heard about projects that were contradicting each other because nobody was centralizing anything. And so one business unit did one project, and the function level and the group level, they did another project, and the results were not, they were contradicting. This is a problem, right? It's a waste of money, it's a waste of time, it's a waste of energy. And we can't really afford to spend too many OPEX these days, right? We need to be careful about that. So it's important to make sure that you spend your money where you need to and where it advances your strategy the most. So here, this is the question we asked them, is that, are you making sure that you spend your money where you need it? And what we saw is that that's like very, very balanced. Like 1/4 of the respondents, they just don't have a consulting strategy or even consulting priority. They just spend. And they don't have even a consulting budget, actually. They have 1/4 that have a consulting budget that is spent as they go. And then we have two that have defined a strategy. They have a strategy and it's aligned with their corporate needs, but it's not necessarily prioritized and managed. Then only 27% have implemented demand management for consulting. It means that only 27%, when they launch a project, even a big one, are assessing systematically that this project is aligned with the strategic goals of the organization. And funny enough, that tool, demand management, is probably one of the most efficient ones in order to keep control of your expenses and keep control of the impact that you get. Because this is all about advancing the strategy, right? So that's very interesting one. There's still a lot to do, a lot to do on this one, but that's a very powerful lever in order to improve the way you manage your consulting spend. And actually, this can be true even for small companies. I mean, you don't need to be a very, very big one in order to make sure when you're buying consulting, it's aligned with your strategy. Make or buy. So do you have a make or buy strategy for the consulting category? Do you make sure when you buy consulting that this is the only way to launch this project is to work with external consultants? Here, the question is quite relevant. And a lot of companies are now building internal consulting groups or equivalent. That can be Excellence Center or any fancy name, but a lot of them have that. So we should see quite a bit of systematic make or buy analysis when before we launch a project. But the truth is, almost 40% just don't do it. And it's a problem because we know that two things. First, when you work with consultant, it's going to be more expensive when we do it internally. That's the rule. We know that. So it not only cost-wise, it's not only the most efficient to work with external consultants. Second, when you launch a project on topics where you need the expertise, sometimes it's more interesting to take a little bit more time and build it internally because you keep the skill for the future instead of doing that externally. So there are many, many reasons why working internally can be interesting. There's not only about money, it's not only about timing, it can be many reasons. Is that some projects cannot be externalized because they they are touching, confidential intellectual property, or it's a strategic project, and you know that the more people around the table, the riskier in terms of breach of confidentiality. So there are many reasons. I'd have to say that I was surprised to see that only 40% are systematically reviewing the make or buy options. That sounds pretty low, considering the risk that is attached to that. And finally, digital. So here, this is a new question. We didn't have that 5 years ago. It's a new one. We wanted to know if companies were using digital solutions for their consulting procurement. And we had 4 different levels. The first one was we don't use digital solutions, and we have 17%, which makes sense since we have very small companies. We have those that follow us. They spend via spreadsheets. I know that in some big companies, they still do that. And then we have a spend monitoring solution. And then there's a category-specific digital solution. For the truth is that the last part is we're curious about this one, because we know that there are not many consulting category-specific digital solutions. And that's why actually we're trying to build one. But that was still interesting to see that you have 53% that only leverage digital to monitor their spend, which means that they're not looking at anything other than the spend. Because there's many other things that you manage your panel, you can work on the feedback, performance measure, all of this can be done through a digital solution. But here they just do, that's kind of basic management of the category. And we're not even talking about the 17% that are not using digital solution at all. So this was quite an interesting answer. And I think that we will probably change a little bit that questions in the next year in order to get a little bit more detail. But that was very interesting. Though we see that we still have more than 50% that are using digital solutions, which means that it's moving in that direction of the digital transformation of procurement that we hear about like every day. So that was very interesting. So that was about another results. We will publish more in-depth results in the next month. And of course, all those that have answered to the survey, we will share the customized report on one-on-one meetings. We made the promise, we will fulfill it. But while we're here, let's talk about how you can take your capability to the next level based on what we said. So the first one thing, it's about people. And again, collaboration, communication, all of this. You need to convince the business line that better buying consulting is good for them. And why don't they think that? Is because they don't always understand what procurement brings to the table. Why should I work with them? They're just a bottleneck. They don't know the consulting firm. They don't know anything. And it's not always wrong. I mean, sometimes it's true. But a well-informed, well-organized procurement specialist could really bring a lot of value when buying consulting services. The other reason that they could have is that they have a budget to spend anyway, and they have pressure from higher up to achieve fast. So they don't want to kind of have the procurement involved in that because it's going to be more complicated. Another reason is that they don't want to bring new players because they don't know them. And you know that consulting is still, confidential. It's like behind the curtains. Word of mouth type of industry where you recommend people personally. So that can be a reason why they don't want to change on that side. But the thing is that you have to convince them that if you're able to improve your consulting procurement capability, they'll be able, because they have more value, because they will work with only the right projects, because they will work only with the right consultants and at the right price, they will be able to do more with the same budget. They will work with better consultants. They will avoid overlaps. Like, there's a company that we work with that told us that last year they have 8 business units that launched the same project at the same time with different suppliers. If they had worked together, they would probably have had a better price, but only build on the things that the other one has done, and better results, lower prices, better negotiation. This is looking for synergies, and of course deliver more value for the organization. So another very important part is defining the right processes, and this is not necessarily about very big companies. Decision making is the first one. It's like you need to be clear on who decides to buy, and it doesn't have to be kind of one person deciding for everything. It can be a more refined decision-making process. You could have under a certain threshold, that's that, and over a certain threshold, and under another one, that's that, etc. So it has to be adapted to the volume that you handle and the workload that you will represent for your teams. You need to improve your sourcing process. So here, what I'm putting my finger on is how to define your needs. Any consultant would tell you that this is their number one challenge when they're working with clients that are not really used to work with consultants, is that it's really hard to translate those needs into a project scope. And you need, as a procurement leader, you need to help your business line to do that right, because it will save you a lot of time, and it will save you also a lot of disagreements with the consultant during the project. And when not everything goes right, then you have something that you can refer to and say, this is what we said, and you agreed on that. So this is like very, very important. There are other steps in the process that are important, but this one is probably the most crucial one. Establish a project management process. You might wonder, why is she talking about project management? We're talking about procurement and consulting and so on. A consulting project is, I'm going to surprise you, I'm sure, but it is a project, and it means that you have to manage it as a client. You cannot let the consultant lead everything. You can't give them full power on it. You need to manage it, and for many reasons. One is that you need to manage the change in the project, because we all know that project never unfold as we thought they would. So that's first. You need to make sure that the deliverables are delivered, that the milestones are achieved, that you get what you paid for, actually. But it goes the other way too, is that you need to put the consultants in the right condition to deliver the highest value. This is in your interest too. So managing a project is essential for the results, for the control, and for the relationship with your consultants. Super important. Evaluate the performance. I said that before. You need to have a process to do that. It can be a simple one, but you need to give some feedback to the consultants, especially the ones that you work with on a regular basis, your preferred providers and strategic suppliers. There's no way out. And then implement category management is, of course, a lever to improve. And you need to have one that makes sense and is adapted to your company, the volumes they're handling, and blah, 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 all of this. You need also to build the right organization. So when you buy consulting, depending on who you are, how you're organized, how you are centralized, how many projects you're buying in a year, what are the strategic evolution that you're expecting, then there will be several options. There's no one fits all organization that will work for everyone. There are 3 different main options, let's say that. One is having everything managed by the business line. It's like the DIU, like do it yourself, that self-service one. A second way is to have full support from procurement. Procurement is handling most of the process with collaboration. And the third part is you outsource to specialists. Of course, it's rarely one and not the other. It's probably a mix of all of this. And it can be a mix that's based on footprint, on business unit versus group. It can be something based on threshold. Under a certain amount, it's managed by business line, and then it's outsourced, and then it's full support. Whatever. The thing is, you need to define what's your organization to source consulting the best way based on your existing organization and your culture and your values and your needs. This is very important. And then you have to collaborate with the right people. So we need to collaborate. And actually, when you buy consulting, you have 4 things that you need to have in order to do it right. You need to know about procurement. You need to know about business. You need to know consulting. And you need to be good at project management. And if you look at what we have here, we see that you will rarely find someone that is good at everything. And then you won't be able to build a team with people that are good at everything. So the only way for you is to identify in your organization who are the people that have those skills, and set up a team that can, as a whole, answer that. And then build an incentive system that is not based on savings or processes, but rather on value for the organization, whatever you think is important when it's buying consulting services. Is it impact? Is it internal client satisfaction? Whatever that is, right? And finally, you need to change the culture. You need to emphasize collaboration, make sure that everybody is working together. I think I've stressed enough the importance of collaboration between business lines and procurement, between procurement and consulting firms, between consulting firms and clients, and so on. It's very important. That's kind of key, and with consulting. And then develop a project management culture. It is going to be very hard to be strict and demanding with your consultants if you don't have the same level of and you're not as strict with your internal project. So you need to have a strong project management culture. So when you launch a consulting project, you have people that can manage that very well, make sure that it's delivered on time and quality and cost, and that the impact that you expect is there, and that you have your value for money. So this is also very important. So you see that when you start building a consulting sourcing capability, there's a lot of things to do, and a lot of things to consider. And depending on your starting point, you can achieve that in 6 months, 1 year, 3 years, and maybe it's just an ongoing process, and where you're moving up the ladder on the maturity grade, and that's it, right? So that's it. You have all the levers. Now, I just wanted to briefly talk about what's next for us. Indeed, the 2022 assessment survey is over, but the assessment is still available online, and we will do the customized report for free. So if you're interested in, knowing how well you do on that front, just hesitate to go on our website or send us a note, and we will share with you the link, so you can do that. We are working on the customized reports for our respondents, the 76 that answered, and we'll present them the results, and we will publish an article summarizing the findings before the end of the year. And of course, we are working on improvement for 2023. So if you have ideas or feedback, or you think there are some topics that we missed or we should add to the next survey, so don't hesitate to reach out and tell us. We're always interested in doing better, and improving our surveys. So that's it. So if there are any questions, this is the moment. This is the right moment to ask them. So everyone is sleeping, obviously. So there was one question. How much do you think we can gain? That's a tough one. How much do we think we could gain in implementing and moving up the maturity level of your company? So of course it depends on where you start, but in our experience, what we saw is that you can save between 15 to 40% of your consulting spend just by implementing common sense policies. Why? Because most companies don't do it for this category. They do it for everything else. But this one, they're struggling with it. So I'd say it will depend on who you are, but unless you're already best in class, then there are good chances that you will be able to save a significant portion. So, but there's another side to that story. Sometimes it's hard to get your top management to be interested in that, because actually they're not necessarily interested in making savings on consulting. They are interested, though, in having more projects. So you can save money, or you can deliver more value within the same budget. And that could be also another way to interest them in moving and engaging in such a transformation, because you will have to involve the top leadership in the process, in the journey, because it won't work without them. All right. Well, that's it. If there are other questions, don't hesitate to send me directly on my email, or you will receive an email after the session. Don't hesitate to answer to that email if you have other questions that I haven't answered. It was very nice to have you all. Thank you. You will receive the recording of the session, and at the end of the session, you will have available the slides of this, the PDF of the slides. So don't hesitate to download them. And if there's anything that's not working, it's the first time we're using the platform, so tell us, because it's kind of it's a new process for us all. Thank you, everyone. Have a very good end of your day. Bye bye.